So welcome everyone to our webinar. You are welcome to introduce yourself in the chat box. The session is recorded and we will be sharing the link with all participants afterwards. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the webinar. For that, I'm asking that you put your questions in the Q&A box. So if you look at the bottom of your screen where you can see the panelists, you should see a little Q&A option. You can put your question in there at any time and we'll pick them up once everyone else has spoken. So before we start, I thought I'd introduce Changing Futures. So Changing Futures is a government-funded programme dedicated to improving local services for adults and young people who face multiple disadvantage. We're trialling new ways of working in partnership and recording and sharing whatever we learn from those attempts at working in that way. Our aim is to create sustainable change at individual service and system levels and influence the government policy and local commissioning. So one of the key systemic issues that we're facing again and again is around how we support people who have no recourse or limited eligibility to public funds. And following discussions with other Changing Futures areas in the country, we know that it's not just in Bristol. Actually, this happens all over the UK. We know that non-UK nationals are more vulnerable to homelessness, especially if they have restricted or undetermined eligibility to public funds. Homeless Link and Accommodation Network, also known as NACCOM, have conducted research with local authorities, homelessness and immigration stakeholders, and with people with lived experience of homelessness across England. And based on that research, they have published a report that puts forward a roadmap for change for local authorities and the government. Today, we're going to hear about that roadmap. We'll also hear a little bit about what's happening in Bristol and the work that's being done. And we'll also have my colleague Abdi, who will share his experience of working with people with no recourse or limited eligibility to public funds, and he will give us examples of how he secured support for his clients. So I'll quickly introduce our panelists and then we can kick off. So we have Katia, who's a policy manager at Homeless Link. We have Leon, who's a policy and research coordinator at NACCOM. And we have Abdi, who's a service coordinator at Changing Futures Bristol. So, Katia, Leon, do you want to take it away?
Yes, thanks. I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me a moment. Great. Can you see that all right?
Yep.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you this morning. So I'm Katia Mbita, Policy Manager at Homeless Link, and I will be doing this presentation with my colleague Leon Elliott from NACCOM. So just onto the report. So as Sarah Jane has mentioned, we conducted a research, in 2021 and 2022, just after everyone in. So in partnership with 3 local authorities. So that was Bedford, Haringey, and Manchester. So a lot of our work, we were very interested in looking at what solutions are available for non-UK nationals. And this was especially after coming out of everyone in, because we saw all of the good things that could happen, and in terms of solutions for people without recourse to public funds or those with restricted eligibility when they were accommodated and had services provided to them and assisted to settle their status. So this report is very much from that. So as part of our work across those 3 local authority areas, we conducted 49 interviews. So these were with council staff from those 3 areas, support providers. So that would include people like yourselves, and also lived experience. It was very important for us to have the lived experience in there. So our colleagues at NACCOM, who we've partnered with, they have community researchers who are a group of people who've got lived experience of restricted eligibility and homelessness or destitution. So it was very important to be able to bring those voices in and basically to have that lived experience voice captured, I guess. So just in terms of the work itself, we published this report after those interviews and after analysis of what we found in those local areas. And just this is one of the chapters in terms of the report itself. So the report is divided into 3 substantive chapters. So the first one looks at the operational aspects of the system. So basically, what is it that's needed to build the right environment for commissioning services? So I should mention a lot of the findings that we have in this report are targeted at local authorities, but we do have practical solutions in there as well that service providers like yourself can basically tap into. And we also think that it's very important for people who are providing services to be aware of what local authorities should be doing so that they can advocate on behalf of their clients when they do go out to seek support from local authorities. So the graphic there shows 6 key themes that we identified. I'm not going to go into all of them, but we will just be focusing on 3. So that's accommodation pathways, accessibility of services, and partnerships for immigration advice. So I'm just going to pass on to Leon just to discuss the accommodation pathways.
Yeah, thanks, Katja. So yeah, as Katja mentioned, the research emphasised the importance of local authorities having universal accommodation. So that's bed spaces available to people regardless of immigration status. So more than this just being a humanitarian imperative, we saw that when stable accommodation was provided, it enabled much better services to be delivered and much better outcomes for individuals. So for an example, we found that it enabled services to be provided to people where they were, rather than having to deliver services on the street. And we also heard that this boosted engagement within those local authorities, especially in cases where someone maybe had typically disengaged with services and were harder to reach. When they gave them bed spaces and delivered services to them in-house, engagement was much better, and that led to better outcomes. We also saw that the provision or having a base also allowed for delivery of wellbeing interventions, and that greatly improved not only the progression of immigration applications, but also move on from homelessness as well. So, for example, we saw this working quite well in Haringey. So by November 2021, through everyone in, 344 people housed in COVID hotels had been supported to move on to more stable housing. Similarly, in Bedford, the cohort of just under 400 that had been housed in COVID hotels again had changed multiple times and had been supported to move on, which is great. And we know that there can be barriers for local authorities in providing accommodation to people with restricted eligibility, but we did identify 2 roles that they can play, the local authorities can play in ensuring that there is some sort of offer in their system for people with restricted eligibility. So first of all, we found that there was a role that local authorities can play in providing funding for accommodation. So, for example, local authorities can use RSI funding to provide rent-free assessment beds, which aren't necessarily reliant on housing benefits. We also found examples of how local authorities can provide premises to charities to accommodate non-UK nationals, perhaps temporarily. For example, whilst their immigration status is being assessed, perhaps an asylum leaver, for example. And an example in Haringey was where a premise had been earmarked for development. A void had been earmarked for development further down the line, and in the meantime, this was given to a charity who were using that to deliver accommodation for people with for non-UK nationals experiencing homelessness. And the report contains a lot of examples of the different types of funding roles that local authorities, the funding roles that local authorities might be able to play in these partnerships, often with, as we mentioned, like voluntary services or perhaps with housing associations. But there's also a role in terms of facilitating bed spaces for non-UK nationals that local authorities can play. So we saw that where a local authority were legally limited in the accommodation that they could provide, they could play an important role in facilitating that accommodation elsewhere. So, for example, for supporting voluntary services in providing other types of accommodation, or maybe using their role to influence and bring necessary parties together to work through the community accommodation needs for non-UK nationals. So not only funding accommodation quite explicitly, but also just facilitating others to deliver that accommodation and using the expertise and the knowledge and resources that they have to do so. I think on the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in the report themselves, there's kind of a lot more detailed explanation of those different type of models that may be used. But within that as well, in the report, we explored the different powers that local authorities might be able to use to actually deliver accommodation or bed spaces for non-UK nationals who aren't eligible for homelessness and housing support. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but as you can see there are various social care powers that can be used, such as the Care Act for vulnerable adults, or the Children's Act, Section 17 for children and families. And we see this being used a lot across the network. Our members are able to refer people to bed spaces within local authorities under those powers. Similarly, there's a lot of health powers that can be used, such as the NHS Act 2006 and Local Authority Act 1972. Again, I won't go into it in too much detail, but really part of the report was just emphasising to local authorities the powers and the duties that can be used to accommodate people with no recourse to public fund or restrict the eligibility. So this is something that we see done very well in some local authorities, but equally other local authorities are less familiar with the powers that they may have, and as a result are quite hesitant to deliver or explore the options that may exist for them in terms of unlocking the accommodation for people with restricted eligibility. And next slide. So again, you won't be able to see this here, but just to give an example, this table included in the report highlights some quite practical examples of the accommodation models we're talking about. Both those kind of models facilitated and funded by local authorities and by councils. So several of those models include partnerships with housing associations, and also several involve partnerships with voluntary services, including those within the NACCOM network. So within the table, we describe the model type, the funding arrangement, the role that the local authority plays, and then how it works in practice, hopefully kind of serving as some sort of inspiration, not only for voluntary services in terms of approaching local authorities, but also local authorities thinking around, what kind of services can they commission, and should they be reaching out to voluntary services or faith groups or housing associations to kind of establish these partnership models for unlocking those types of support. Next slide.
Thanks, Leon. So I'll just jump back in. So just onto the accessibility chapter that we've got in the report there. So like I said, a lot of this we target at local authorities, but I think this is one that's really important in terms of what you yourselves can do. So a key theme that came through from our lived experience groups was the importance of providing accessible services to non-UK nationals. So especially those who may have gone through the asylum system or had complex cases. So we know a lot of these people that we are supporting, they've been through some really traumatic experiences, and with that can come a lot of fear and distrust in systems. So there was work to be done just in terms of the areas that we worked in terms of making sure that those doors were open, and when they were open, there was a welcoming environment that was there for them. So as a start, we really do emphasize, not just for local authorities, but also for yourselves, just acknowledging the fear and distrust and discrimination that may have characterized some of the experiences of the people that you assist. And in terms of some areas, we did see that there was a need for staff training, so especially frontline local authority staff and charity staff, just to be able to provide trauma-informed, person-centered support. So we talk about trauma-informed quite a lot, and I think it is one of those buzzwords that's thrown around quite a fair bit, but it's just the importance of actually getting to the root of that. So like I said, just the acknowledgement of the experiences of the people who are coming through your doors. So other things that we thought were also important is just being mindful of the type of language that's used with those people who do come through the door. So different cultures, just in terms of the way that you may phrase something, it may be perceived in another way. So interviewees in the lived experience groups were concerned that language barriers and cultural misunderstandings sometimes led to crucial pieces of information being missed, which basically led to them disengaging from the process when they were seeking support. So also just mention, shouldn't be there just to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So it's also important just to engage in prevention work. So not too sure what you do in terms of your own services, but just the importance of being able to get people before they do become homeless. So we heard about people not knowing about what rights they had in terms of tenancies, and for those who were on their way to claiming refugee status, for example, just what would happen at the end of that, what would they become entitled to. So just being able to get into communities and target work and bring those services to people where they were. So in Haringey, we saw this working really well. They had a community champion model with community link workers who basically went out to build trust. And I should also add that this year we did work with Southampton to basically roll out this model again. So conducted interviews, and we did see in terms of the services who were providing support, what worked really well was the fact that they were very much present, going out into communities and building on those relationships with people. So in terms of immigration advice, this is one of the big ones that we found was very, very important in terms of embedding that advice into homelessness systems. So our findings showed that immigration status is rarely a fixed state and should be treated as that, basically something that needs to be addressed. So in the areas that we worked with, we saw just how crucial it was for there to be partnerships between support workers and immigration advice workers. So where these partnerships were established on joint management of cases, there were really great results that were being achieved. And we saw that support workers being able to work with those immigration advisors did pick up, for example, if someone came through the door, just from that collaboration that they were having, that if someone mentioned specific things, there's things that they could think about in terms of, okay, this is something that the immigration advice worker will need to know, and this is the potential outcome that might be there. And just on to, so I've gone through all of that advice. And I think one of the most important things just linked to that last point I mentioned is that literacy in terms of homelessness staff. So like I've mentioned, so Leon has shown some of those legislative powers that local authorities can use to support people with restricted eligibility. And we think it's very important for yourselves also just to be familiar with those, so that when there is pushback, for example, you at least know what it is that you can tap into. And just onto the second chapter of the report. So this one very much looks at the foundational structures that are needed to be built to make good services happen. So basically the operational factors that we've been talking about, what is it that makes them possible? So going to draw on 3 key strands. And the first one is just the importance of whole council leadership. So this is one more for your information, and one where we think that you should basically be advocating for. So as support providers, very relevant in terms of being able to advocate for your clients. So we found that it was very, very crucial for anything in terms of the services that were being provided or the support that was being provided to non-UK nationals, for there to be whole council leadership, because setting that commitment at the top really affected what was going on at the bottom. So for example, frontline workers, we wouldn't expect, if there's council has a laissez-faire approach, I should say, or we don't really know how we'll treat non-UK nationals when they do come through the door. We wouldn't expect frontline staff to be the ones who are being brave enough to say, okay, if this person comes through the door, this is the type of things that we can be assisting with. So we found that it was very, very important for there to be ownership by councils to be able to put strategies in place in terms of how to deal with people who did come through the door. And not just having strategies and commitments, but being very explicit about those. So we found that in Haringey, for example, after we conducted this research, they went ahead and actually put into their rough sleeping strategy what it is that they'll be doing specifically for those people who came through the door. So rather than just having a broad kind of commitment of, okay, if someone comes through the door who doesn't have restricted eligibility, will provide that welcome, and that's where it ends. So basically having some of those commitments that people like yourselves can view and be able to keep the local authorities to account. And just on to Leon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So yeah, as you can see, one of the main issues that was raised in the lived experience focus groups was the importance of confronting racism and discrimination that people experience when attempting to access the homelessness support. In particular, people described feeling dehumanized, distrusted, and dismissed at that first interaction with services. We also heard examples of individuals being inappropriately refused support in the social care due to assumptions that were made, incorrect assumptions made about their immigration status based on their race. And then even then, when support options are limited for an individual, there is still that opportunity for trauma-informed and solutions-focused communications to really improve the overall experience and start dismantling, you know, some of the kind of racism and discrimination that might be built into these services as well. So we think that this is something that's within council's control and can have quite a transformative effect on people's experience of the services as well. So yeah, that's just some examples of the experience of racism that we heard from people with lived experience. Really showed how important it is to have the perspective of migrants built into these homelessness systems and wider systems. So in order to deliver the change that's needed, we also need to change systems that are systematically racist, and there needs to be a culture shift within that. And we also need to see the strategies and services within local authorities being informed by those with lived experience. That's definitely not an easy process, and it will take time and it takes thought. But we've also seen that where efforts can be made to work towards this, they do work. So just an example is in Haringey and in Manchester, a legislative theatre approach has been used, and it showed how non-UK national voices can be represented within these systems to good effect.
Thanks, Leon. And just on to just the final chapter of the report there. So we're very conscious that everything, the work that local authorities do and also the support that you yourselves provide is very much characterized by what's going on nationally. So those that legislation that is in place. And I know that right now there's a lot of changes that are going on. So asylum cessation support, for example, Illegal Migration Act. So things are very much, they change very quickly in this space. So in terms of that last chapter of our report, we also make recommendations in terms of what it is that we need to see from government. So basically the changes that need to happen. So for there to be accommodation to be provided, the funding gaps that are currently present in the homelessness system, and specifically for non-UK nationals, those definitely need to be reviewed. And also just in terms of access to justice, so a lot of that flows through, again, just the need of immigration advice for that to actually be funded. And yeah, we know that there's lots of cuts to legal aid, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And also the reduction in the delays in terms of asylum decision making. So we know that right now the Home Office does have that streamlined asylum process, but it's also thinking about, okay, well, you've put this asylum cessation the cessation of support in place, but where are all those people going to be going? So thinking ahead, not just in terms of we're getting that backlog down, but how are we actually supporting people to actually go out and be able to find suitable move on accommodation. So also just very much the need for asylum policies themselves to be reviewed. So the right to work, for example, we very much advocate that if someone is applying for asylum, for example, so after a certain period of time, for them to actually be able to work and make a living for themselves, because the amount of money that is provided for support is very limited, and there's not really much you can do with it. And also right at the moment, so along with NACCOM and others in the homelessness and migrant sector, we're calling for the reversal of that cessation process. So basically to enable people to, it's just such a short period of time between receiving your decision and those 28 days. We know that a lot of the documentation that's needed, it doesn't come through in that period of time. So we're calling for a reversal of that. And with that as well, we're also wanting, we're calling for the period of time to be increased to 56 days, so in line with the Homelessness Reduction Act. And also we're very well aware, like I mentioned, we've got things such as the Illegal Migration Act, which are looming in the background, so we don't know when things like that are going to be implemented, but it's also a call from us for those to be abandoned. So the roadmap, like I said, is very much there to be used. And I think for yourselves, it's very much a great tool in terms of local advocacy. So what it is that you should be aware of to be able to push councils in terms of supporting non-UK nationals. So highly recommend that you have a look at that. It's got some really great best practice examples just in terms of services and local authorities themselves. So that is all from us. Thanks.
Thank you, Katya and Leon. Leon, do you want to tell us a little bit about what's happening in Bristol with the NRPF group?
Yeah. So it started as quite an informal meeting based on, well, with one of our members, Bristol Hospitality Network. I was fortunate to visit with them, and also we had someone from the council and from at that point the Good Faith Partnership, who were kind of interested in coordinating the piece of work in this area. So we had an initial meeting very informally, and then that was kind of inspiration for the need to do something a bit more formal and kick on with establishing some sort of subgroup or convening group within Bristol on the topic of restricted eligibility. So that started with a formal first meeting back in April with what was at that time being called the Bristol NRPF subgroup. So it was a relatively small group of people and bodies within Bristol interested in addressing the challenge of non-UK national homelessness. And at that first session, I attended with Katya to present the findings of our report, the Unlocking the Door report. I think in the room was also obviously City Council, Red Cross, various local migrant homelessness services, some mainstream homelessness services, and also some asylum-focused organisations as well. And really, we discussed what had been done in local authorities elsewhere on this topic. Thinking about the roadmap and the routes that can be taken towards kind of integrating the needs of non-UK nationals more closely, or tying it more closely into homelessness strategies. And then what could be done in Bristol. I think Bristol City Council also talked about what they had planned and what they'd been doing with some of the RSI funding, the Rough Sleep Initiative funding as well, which did have an allocation for non-UK nationals. So that was great. So I think the initial session was about getting people on the same page, knowing who was who. And then we agreed on the back of that there was an appetite for these sessions to continue. I think we had a bit of a discussion around the naming, and we decided to rename it the Restricted Eligibility Group. We also just identified what the key challenges were and who wasn't in the room. And I think access to immigration advice and also access to bed spaces inevitably were kind of two obvious needs. We had a second meeting in May, and then we pulled together the terms of reference, outlining what the group's objectives were. And we were really pleased at NACCOM and Homeless Link to see the report being referenced within the terms of reference. It really kind of drawing on, I think within the terms of reference, it was something like along the lines of the group will draw on the recommendations and good practice from Unlocking the Door, which we're really happy to see, of course. I'm really happy that other local authorities were taking on some of the learnings and findings that we'd heard from local authorities doing good things. And then it was agreed that these meetings would kind of take place every 2 months. And then the last meeting we had was back in September. So this was a much larger group, kind of coordinated as some sort of mapping workshop. So we had the same, you know, the kind of people you'd expect, like City Council, NACCOM, homelessness services, more specialist migrant homelessness services, more specialist migrant services. But then we also had the police, probation services, you know, quite a wide group. Anybody who would kind of, you know, with an interest in working towards making the system better for poor non-UK nationals. And we really came together with the aim of mapping all of these services and the support available for people in Bristol, people with restricted eligibility. Personally, I thought it was an amazing session. It was very hands-on, which was good. It was just good to meet the people that you're working towards the same things with. I don't think you can quite do that online. It was just great to be there in person. But we weren't only discussing accommodation, we were also discussing welfare support, advice, legal support. And then not only spotting, you know, identifying the services that existed, but obviously spotting the gaps in those services, seeing where there was maybe duplication, and also seeing what support was available to different groups within the wider restricted eligibility banner. Obviously, it's a very diverse group, very specialist needs within that. Not all services are open or available to each group under the banner of restricted eligibility. So yeah, that was the idea of mapping it, and then we're coming back in November for the next session, really just continuing on using it along the terms of reference. And I think, yeah, it's I don't know how frequently these occur in other parts of the country. I know we do have similar things across the network, but yeah, obviously me living in Bristol and being slightly biased, I thought it's been very, very helpful and really great to kind of get everybody in the same place. I think there's been intention for a while to work on something similar in Bristol, and we had something called the Bristol NRPF model published. I think it might have been back at the beginning of 2022. But having spoken to some of the services within our network, there was a little bit of frustration or kind of questions, why hasn't this gone any further? So it was brilliant to see when this was picked up with the support of Changing Futures and support of kind of a few other organisations as well, really kicking it on. And now it feels like we are making some good progress, which is brilliant.
Wonderful, thank you. So Abdi, we're now going to come to you. So Abdi is one of our service coordinators who has a lot of experience working with people who are refugees and asylum seekers. So Abdi, do you want to give us examples of how you work with your clients and how you've managed to secure support for them when typically the door would be shut? You're muted, Abdi.
Yeah, I'm back now. Can you hear me now? Yes,
yeah.
Okay. Well, normally I work with people with multiple complexity, people with substance misuse, in and out of prison, mental health and homelessness. That's the objective of Changing Futures. But at the same time, we have people with no recourse to public fund, and also they have their own challenges, and that's culture, language. Living for many years in our city. Therefore, there is a little trust and relationship with professionals. So myself, I had a challenge to work with them initially, but so what happened was I started to build a trust, help them to have access to the funding that we have in the project. And then I slowly started introducing local services, starting from helping them to attend social care assessment to check if they have any care needs elements. And then slowly helping them to have access mental health assessment and regular support of mental health reviews and treatment. At the same time, in physical health screening in the local GB. And after that, we secure these two, and possibly some of them, they have care needs, and they secure accommodation arranged and funded by adult social care. That means they have now fixed address. And then we start to contact local immigration solicitors to gather information, to contact all the professionals involved in their care so they can write down about their health or mental health issues. And then we submit a fresh application to the Home Office. Most of the time, and I think almost 80% or 70% of the clients that I'm working with, they have received good news from the Home Office, but unfortunately, it was limited leave to remain. Most of the time, 2.5 years. And it's a really very big challenge for the clients to renew this. The other challenge that we have faced was some of them, they don't have a capacity to instruct immigration solicitors. And then I have to act third-party representation on behalf of the client, so that I can instruct myself immigration solicitors. So that's really the work that we have done here in Bristol. We have a lot of challenges. The challenge is Home Office issuing limited leave to remain. The other challenges is where you will find, because these clients are very hidden and quite challenging to find them. And also, once you find them, is how you can create trust and relationship. That was also a challenge. But what we have done was working in partnership with social services, mental health team, outreach, and Mango was really very helpful. And other voluntary organizations like Bristol Somali Resource Center, Bristol Refugee Rights, Bristol Hospitality Network, and immigration solicitors in Bristol was also very, very helpful. That is the work we have done. And I think majority of our clients, they've secured, good, outcome from the Home Office. But that outcome is a big challenge because all of them were given only 2.5 years limited leave to remain. And the expectations are for the clients with multiple complexity to renew this every 2.5 years. That's really a big challenge for them because Changing Futures or any organization will not be there forever. So that's a really big challenge. And I'm really worried. Like one of my clients, we found out 5 years ago or 6 years ago, he had a limited leave to remain. He didn't renew it, ended up in homelessness, lost all his benefits. Then running, in between London, Bristol, Birmingham for 5-6 years. And now the Home Office granted him leave to remain. Again, I'm worried it may be 2.5 years. And then again, it's a big challenge for our clients. The other challenges is whether our clients have, mostly we do mental health assessment, we never do mental capacity act. So the question is whether our clients have a capacity to instruct solicitors to mention what they've gone through if they don't have a support. And other thing is when they are homeless, it's a quite challenge to access mental health team. And also even if they are going through that assessment, what kind of support is available for them? Because they don't trust anyone. Mental health is stigma, language barrier, cultural barrier. So they really need very assertive, compassionate intervention so that we can secure for them, a lasting outcome for them. So that's what we are doing. Luckily, we have a good outcome, but the main question is about the sustainability of that outcome.
Sorry. Do you want to speak briefly to, because you're saying it's difficult when some clients don't have capacity to instruct solicitors, and I know that you took on a special role for one of our clients where you acted as what's called a litigation friend. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's quite an unusual case, and I think that might be quite interesting for people to know that that's an option.
I think people with no recourse to public funds, especially asylum seekers, they struggle and a lot of mental health issues. And that these mental health issues is pre or post immigration. And they have hope that when they come here, possibly they will be better. But at the same time, they really struggle mentally and physically as well. And some of them, they don't have a capacity to instruct the solicitors or to advocate themselves for their best interest. So in one case, I take one of my clients who is immigration solicitor, and we found out that the client cannot instruct. I'm okay, cannot even mention about whatever she's struggling with. And the immigration officer look up I cannot take this because we need capacity assessment. And once we have done the capacity assessment, we found out the client doesn't have a capacity to instruct or for their best interest. So I acted, as a litigation friend through court of protection. And then at that stage, in that process, was quite new in Bristol. Initially, we contacted adult social care to act on behalf of the client. They said no, they couldn't do it. We contacted different organizations. And because the legally is quite, when you read the notes of litigation friends, are quite challenging. Then after reading a long time and understanding, then we took, the chance to act this client as a litigation friend. And then we have been a litigation friend for this client even until now. And I'm very pleased that the client secured leave to remain from Home Office. She is now in accommodation arranged and funded by adult social care. She is now receiving state benefits, and she's going through mental health treatments and reviews. And compared to her situation 5 years ago and now, is a huge difference. And that's only because of we acted litigation. I have been a litigation friend, and we have been communicating on behalf of. I have another client now who secured the leave to remain from Home Office. 20 years living rough in Bristol, and then she doesn't have a capacity. When we applied universal credit, then she cannot. She doesn't means to even go through a universal credit journal. So now we are acting as a corporate appointee. So we manage her universal credit. So the challenge is not only about service delivery or availability of service, but is about checking whether the clients have a capacity or means to understand about the services which is available in the local area. So in this particular client that I'm working with, is just in the EU, I'm responsible for universal credit to log on. I'm receiving the text messages. I'm ensuring that everything is online in order. But the biggest challenge is who will continue this? Who will do it after me? Because Changing Futures is going to end in March 2025. Now I'm working with my team around me, and clinical psychologists, local charities supporting this client, and myself, mental health team, adult social care. So now we are discussing what parameters we can use to ensure this client manages his universal credit or benefits or letters from health services. And also this client, unfortunately, received limited leave to remain 2.5 years. His leave to remain runs out December 2025. That's also an added layer of complexity for the client, because the client cannot even remember they cannot even understand because of cognitive disorder. They can't even understand they have a limited leave to remain. So the challenges are really very huge. It can be sorted out, but we need other parameters to ensure that we have sustainability plan for them.
I agree. I think continuity is a real issue. And I think in that sense, partnership working is probably one of the keys. So thank you, everyone. That was really interesting. I will start relaying questions from the audience. And the first question we have is from Kelly, who's asking who funds and supports the implementation of the structure plan that you were suggesting, Katia?
So what do you mean by that? Sorry.
I'm assuming that this is about who's funding behind it. I think what a lot of our people are finding is that they get a blanket no from statutory services. We're like, no recourse to public fund. That means that we can't help. So where do the funds come from, and how do we support this?
I think that is one of the challenges that is very much present. So a lot of the work that we did and the research areas, a lot of that implementation was coming from the gifts that people actually have in terms of their services themselves. So not to just a little pitch, I guess, in terms of our own election manifesto work. That's one of the big things that we have found and that we are pushing for, just ensuring that there is ring-fence funding for homelessness services. So to also include those with restricted eligibility, because without having those dedicated funding to be able to provide to local authorities so that they can go into the right places to support people, I think it is a very difficult challenge to basically be able to do that. So in the areas that we've worked with, it's been a case of local authorities and services basically coming up with different ways to be able to fund some of this work. So yeah.
Okay. And when you get a blanket no, so as Leon pointed out, there's a lot of legislation there. So what would be your go-to? Where would you start in trying to circumvent that no?
I think the important thing is understanding what that no is based on. I think it's very important for us to actually be able to challenge rather than just take that blanket no. So I know in terms of some local authorities, it might be a case that the person who's saying no doesn't even know that there is this legislation that's in place that means that they can actually do something. So I think it's very important that not only do people who are providing those services know what is there, but also possibly be there to educate the people who are on the other side of, okay, we can't do anything because legally our hands are tied, and then this is where you step in, but actually there's this. So being able to use those to actually push for what local authorities should be doing.
So those pieces of legislation, am I right that they're mentioned in your report, aren't they?
Yes,
so people can look them up there.
Yeah. So we've got that table that Leon talked through that is in there as well, and it gives basically a breakdown in terms of what's allowed and what you can do. Yeah.
Wonderful. Abdi, would you say in your case, your first point of call when you have someone is to do a care assessment?
Yes. Generally, the clients that we are working with, they have been in homelessness situation and institution for many, many years with mental health issues. So we, in fact, arrange a social care assessment to check if they have any care needs. And most of the time, the adult social care find out they have a care needs. And that gives them an opportunity to house them and offer them 80, 90 pounds for nightly subsistence from adult social care. That's really is a good step because these clients, they never had any form of income in the past. They never had their own accommodation in the past. And that gives us an opportunity to arrange mental health assessment, to arrange physical health screening. It gives us an opportunity to arrange social prescribing elements so they can attend drop-in sessions, so that they can meet other people. It also gives us a trust and relationship, and then we link them immigration solicitor. And other social care was really also understanding about the complexity that these clients are facing. So we are working with a small team in Bristol called Asylum Team within the other social care in Bristol. And they are working really very hard to make sure this client receives their subsistence and receive an accommodation while they are waiting decision from the Home Office.
This is probably to Leon and Katya. I'm just conscious this is going to be a tricky question, but obviously we know some councils have recently gone bankrupt. It's been quite well publicised. What happens then? Do they have the possibility to refuse to support?
Leon, would you like to take that, or would you like me to go?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so the legal duties are still there. So it goes back to what I just mentioned before. So yeah, irrespective of bankruptcy, those legal duties are there. But I guess it also comes down to, okay, what does that mean on the ground? What are the realistically, just what is it that the council's going to do? But those duties are still very much there, and yeah, very much advocate for pointing that out.
Leon, based on your experience of what Bristol is doing, how important is the partnership aspect of things?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think so. As I mentioned in our first session proper, we sat down and we looked at what are the key issues here in Bristol. Two things being mentioned. The first being the lack of immigration advice. So I think through the RSI funding, I know the council had funded something like a solicitor and a half, which is great, to work specifically on kind of immigration cases. And obviously you've got like law projects within Bristol that do that work, but it is overstretched, obviously, and isn't enough to meet the needs that we see in Bristol. So that was a piece of the puzzle. But then secondly, and I guess really important in terms of partnerships, was the accommodation issue. So we know that the local council has freed up bed spaces, which is good, but obviously it's a couple of bed spaces, whereas the need is much greater. We've then obviously got organisations like Bristol Hospitality Network working on the ground, a NACCOM member, delivering bed spaces for people who refuse asylum, but again, they're at capacity. So really what we've been working on is looking what are the new partnerships we need to build in terms of thinking outside the box when it comes to finding these accommodation, finding these bed spaces. So that's where we start looking at things like building relationships with universities. Bristol has 2 universities, and we know that in the past universities have been good when it comes to allowing services to use their accommodation perhaps over the summer or for short periods of time. That might be a short-term fix. Also thinking about building relationships with housing associations, because obviously they do often hold the key to bed spaces and accommodation provision within local authorities. So that's another area we've been targeting, I'd say. And that's a new challenge for Bristol, I'd say, because I guess I was quite surprised going into the Bristol scenario compared to other areas. And some of the areas we talked about in the report was that those partnerships hadn't yet been built with the housing associations in Bristol. I'd say that was the missing piece of the puzzle when it came to meeting the need for bed spaces. On that, I should probably plug, yesterday, NACCOM published our housing association toolkit. So this is quite a lengthy toolkit aimed at local authorities or housing associations who want to build partnerships with voluntary services, and aimed at voluntary services who want to build partnerships with housing associations. And obviously, again, this is something that we'll be looking at in the Bristol scenario as well. But I think just more broadly, obviously, and I think it's the kind of the example of why I thought the mapping workshop was so effective. It's just knowing who is doing what services, building those relationships, making sure people are being referred to the right places. When you sit down in a room and you start the mapping, you start seeing, oh, this, we've got these, we know that these services exist. People are being referred here, but they're being referred back. So really, it's just around building relationships, identifying the services that are being provided, spotting duplication of services, spotting gaps in services, and then working out partnerships that work, I guess, not just kind of relationships that perhaps aren't improving the situation. But yeah, it's obviously quite a big, it's a big challenge. It's one of the major challenges, but we're hoping that, things like this, which really highlight the way that local authorities, housing associations, voluntary services, faith groups can work together, and giving concrete examples of how it can work, like serve as inspiration for other areas.
Thank you, Leon. We have a question specifically for Abdi. How do you keep yourself well in this work? Because the work you do is incredibly emotional and must be difficult to work with people who are getting limited leave to remain, and there is so much uncertainty. So how do you keep yourself well in that, Abdi?
Well, because generally the people I work with are very, very complex, not only asylum seekers, but indigenous people are also struggling. And although the struggle is different, because asylum seekers, people with no recourse to public fund, they have an additional layer of problems. So you say, well, I have my own strategy to keep myself well. That's just playing my football and also working with other professionals in assisting me with the job that I'm doing. Apart from that, I do because I've been doing this work for a long time, and I have my own also lived experience. So it really bothers me. Most of the time, I'm really focused on how I can support this client, how I can get a good outcome. That's really my focus, is to get that. And my interest is how I can get the trust and relationship, how can I create trust and have a good relationship with this client. And once I get that, that makes me really very happy, and that's part of my well-being. And on the top of that is also the outcome. We are working with other professionals. Luckily, now we are using my team around me model, which is a model that all the professionals will come together to support the client. And that helps me a lot, because I'm just coordinating the work, and the others will do their own job description. And if someone is away, he or she can be supported. Like myself, when I'm on annual leave, it's not that the clients will be forgotten, the other professionals are still around the client. So what I'm aware is there's something happening for the client, so I'm pretty more than that.
Thank you, Abdi. And that kind of links back to what Leon was saying about also the importance of partnership working, because it also provides that continuity for the client. One last question, it's going to be a really quick one, and I'm going to put that one to Katya. Is there any up and coming changes to the Home Office or Home Office policies that local authorities and support services should be aware of or prepare for?
I guess the main one that we know is currently causing the crisis that we're seeing is in terms of the cessation of support from the Home Office. So that is basically people now being required to leave the Home Office accommodation after 28 days. So we ourselves and NACCOM, so been working closely with Leon and others in the migrant sector, are very much pushing for that to be reversed, because we're seeing a lot of people turning up to local authorities. Local authorities are saying that they can't assist because they're not support priority need, and then that's spilling over to services, and unfortunately we're in the heartbreaking position of where they're having to turn some people away. So that is the main one that we are aware of, and other things that do come up, we do pop them onto our website. So if anyone does want to kind of keep abreast with that, they can have a look at that. But we're very much involved in working with others within the sector, and also just very much advocating for that change with Home Office through our connections there.
Lovely, thank you. Well, it's 1 minute to 10, so a perfect time to wrap up. Thank you so much, all of you, for your presentations. As I said, we will send you the recording of the webinar, and Katya, could you send me the PowerPoint as well, so I can share that with people afterwards? That'd be great. Wonderful. Well, I wish you all a lovely, lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.